AC, it is late March, and we are headed beyond Hammerland once again into springtime. The, the weather is, it's getting a little sunnier outside. Spring and blossoming and hope are in the air. So, what better film to to review this month for Beyond Hammerland than a 1961 black and white kind of a haunted landscape, very dark, like you need a blanket just to watch the damn thing, chilling film called The Innocents, which you've been after me to watch and discuss for a long time. It keeps coming up in conversation, and now we're finally going to do just that. So first of all, how you doing, sir?
I'm doing well, and I am glad and excited that we do get to finally talk about the film, because it is one of my favorites, and I'm not alone in that. I know that it's held in high regard by a lot of people as, one of the best ghost stories ever committed to film. And it was based on Henry James's Turn of the Screw. It was actually the first film adaptation, even though it would subsequently be adapted many, many, many times over, including the most recent Haunting of Bly Manor for Netflix.
Oh,
that's based on the same story.
I did
Although
not
I've
know
not
that.
seen it. I've not seen it, so I don't know how faithful an adaptation it is. This one is a fairly close adaptation. William Archibald adapted it into a play in 1950, and he's the one who turned it from Turn of the Screw into The Innocents. And then John Mortimer and Truman Capote, and they collaborated on the final screenplay based on Archibald's play.
Well, I have not read The Turn of the Screw. I've not seen the play, read the play, seen any of the other adaptations.
The story was all new to you.
Sort of. I kept having flashbacks to, and we're going to talk about spoilers and everything here, folks, but sure. I kept thinking about, I think it was the 2001 Nicole Kidman movie, The Others.
Okay, sure.
And I kept getting this Others vibe from this picture. And I think that was, may have affected the way that I watched it. I definitely need to watch it again, because now that I know what the film is, I know that it is not, in fact, The Others. It's not even really Others adjacent, except in the most superficial manner. Right. And this will be a very interesting conversation, because I need to find out. You described this as a ghost story. Is it? Is this a ghost story?
Isn't that the question, isn't it? And I think that's also, that ambiguity is there. That's present in James's story as to whether it's a ghost story or whether it's a story of, unreliable narrator who's losing her mind. But yeah, that is kind of the magic of this film. And director Jack Clayton and his cinematographer, Freddie Francis, who, was very much a distinguished director in his own right, they collaborate along with Truman Capote and create this kind of very mystical, like what's actually true, what isn't. And the viewer is as much as in doubt as our lead character, Miss Giddings, played by Deborah Kerr. It is, I think it's just like a masterful film, because it doesn't give you any easy answers, even at the end. Even at the end, you're like, well, wait, what is it? And it's like, what do you think it is? It's up to you.
And, usually that's a red flag for me.
Okay.
When there's a movie that comes out and the filmmaker or filmmakers are kind of ambiguous, like, what do you think it meant? I'm like, I paid you, but this is one of the rare occasions where I feel like, and again, I haven't read the source material, so I don't know how true it is in that sense, but I felt like if the storytellers didn't have an answer, or maybe they did, leading us right up to that precipice of the end where there's going to be a big exposition dump or something, or a rug pull. There's not, but I didn't feel cheated. I felt like, well, there are any number of explanations, and this is why I want to go back, and maybe the answers aren't anywhere in the film. Talking to you just now, it seems like maybe it's just ambiguous through and through, but it feels like one of those films where it's like, I got to go back and look for some more supporting evidence for this is a ghost story, or it's a, woman going crazy in the countryside story.
Right.
I don't know that it matters, but it's still fascinating to think about.
I think it's fun, because I've watched this numerous times, and I think it's fun to watch it from both viewpoints, to be like, is it just her as an unreliable narrator? Are there actually ghosts there? are the children, being haunted by the spirits of Peter Quint, Miss Jessel? Like I suppose I'm throwing out all these names. We should probably do a little synopsis before we get too deep into it.
Well, you opened the door, so I'm going to let you walk right through it, sir. I'll hold it for you.
Well, thanks.
The innocence expert, AC. Tell us what this movie is.
I would call myself an enthusiast, not as opposed to an expert. So the story begins with Miss Giddings, who is hired to be a governess by an uncle who's he's inherited his niece and nephew after their parents had passed away, and there was already a governess in place, but unfortunately that governess has now passed away, and the plot thickens. It's worth noting that our uncle of Flora and Miles, our two children, the uncle is never named. He's only known as the uncle. And Flora and Miles are in need of a governess, and so Miss Giddens gets hired and goes out to Bly Manor and is immediately kind of taken in. She loves these children. Miles is not present at first because he's away at school, but Flora mysteriously says, "Oh no, he'll be home soon." And sure enough, Miles shows up a couple days later, having been expelled from school for being something like being a threat against the other students. And that's kind of, it's left at that. Like, they don't really go into detail about the incident. But anyway, so now Flora and Miles are at home with Ms. Giddens and our housekeeper, Miss Gross. And strange things start happening. And we learn the story of the former governess, Miss Jessel, and Peter Quint, who is the local groundskeeper, and the torrid love affair that they had. And he met with a violent end, and she threw herself into the lake to, heartbroken. And so now the concern is that these two spirits of Peter Quint and Miss Jessel are now haunting not only the house, but perhaps trying to take over the souls of the children.
And this is one of the places where it gets very interesting. Is I can't remember do you remember what the timeline is? Like, when did Quint and then Miss Jessel, when did they die? Was it within a year, or was it longer than that?
It was pretty recent. I mean, the uncle is like, "I need to get somebody in here to take care of this because I have a very busy bachelor life,
Yeah, because I'm just thinking, like, if we're going with the ghost theory and the idea that Peter Quint has possessed young Miles, is he possessing him at boarding school? Because that would be another movie. Like, what led to him finally getting expelled? Because I was also wondering, like, was this going on before Miles went away to school, or this all seems very contemporary?
We do get the sense that there was an influence. They talk about them having an influence over them, while they were still alive. That Miles idolized Peter Quint, and Flora doted on Miss Jessel. So there was very much a sense of these figures were important to the children. And when they passed away, there was deep grief. The uncle says, "Please don't mention it. Please don't mention Miss Jessel to Flora," as she gets very upset.
Yeah, I mean, and they talk about how I think it was Miss Gross talked about the relationship between these two questionable adults who did what was there was a line, oh my gosh,
it was perhaps not the healthiest of relationships.
Right. That's the problem of making notes on my phone, is I have to scroll to find them, and it makes for great viewing.
Well, while you're scrolling to find it, I do recall, like, there was Ms. Gross talks about, like, he would strike her and she would, look as though she was hungry for more. And, she would crawl to him like a dog. And, you just get the sense that it was there was like an S&M relationship going on there. And,
right. And well, I found the line. It was Miss Gross was describing some of the rooms. They were used by daylight as if they were dark woods.
Right.
I mean, that's poetry right there. And it makes me think of, like, Frank and Julia from the Hellraiser movies, that kind of abusive, domineering, but very alluring, kind of mysteriously attractive guy and the woman who just wants to be dominated by him and will do anything, including bring him back from the dead, possibly, or throw herself into the lake out of grief.
Well, and Mr. Gross talks about how like they would do it even in front of the children. Shocking, shocking.
Yeah. I got to pull over for a second because my brain just exploded for like the third time today.
Great.
Michael Redgrave plays the uncle. And I was watching, like, I know that name. The face looks kind of familiar, but I don't recognize the actor. Within the last, I think, month or two, I watched for the first time Alfred Hitchcock's The Lady Vanishes.
Ah, okay.
Have you seen that movie?
I have seen The Lady Vanishes.
That was 1938.
Mm-hmm.
This is 1961 that we're talking about for this film. So yeah, there's been the passage of decades, but I loved him in The Lady Vanishes. Completely different and unrecognizable character in this film, because he's kind of charming. He's very wealthy, but he makes it clear he wants nothing to do with these problematic, kids out in the countryside. He just needs to make sure, like, he has to fulfill all of his legal obligations that they are taken care for, and that's it.
Well, Michael Redgrave, and I do want us to talk about it at some point, but he is one of the stars of one of the more memorable sequences in the 1945 British anthology film Dead of Night. And he plays a haunted ventriloquist, whose dummy starts coming to life. And that's Michael Redgrave, and that was how I first came to know him. And so when I saw his name pop up, I was like, oh, okay, it's Michael Redgrave from Dead of Night. Like the fact that it was 1945 was when he did that film. So yeah, he'd been around for quite a while. Interestingly enough, Jack Clayton was entertaining the idea of hiring Cary Grant to play the part of the uncle. And the story goes, and it may be apocryphal, but the story goes that if they had added on an extra scene at the end, bringing back the uncle, that Cary Grant might have done the role. But that's what he was lobbying for, was that he didn't want to just do one scene. And Jack Clayton, erred on the side of faithfulness to the novel. And also just because he knew how the movie was going to end, it needs to end the way it ends. And so anyway, so Cary Grant did not play in this film, but Jack Clayton says he was sorely tempted.
What do you have any idea what the scene would have been? That did he just want a scene, or was there a particular closing that he wanted?
I don't know beyond that. I just feel like he just didn't want to do just one scene, or his agents or whatever.
They could have had some like interstitial thing where Miss Giddens calls up the uncle and he says, "I told you it's your responsibility," and slams down the phone. There's your second scene.
That was a fine Cary Grant, by the way. Well done.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, this movie is very eerie. I kept thinking, A, I'm cold while I'm watching it. B, this is not the kind of I think the perfect atmosphere is to put this on at like 10 o'clock at night. Now I didn't, because I'm usually asleep by then, but it just does feel like the kind of thing that you don't want to watch in an empty house by yourself, because not a whole lot happens in the movie, but it's very eerie and atmospheric. And yeah, just you never quite know what footing you're on, if there's gonna be a ghost popping up around the corner, or if it's just this lady going insane. And that in itself is frightening, because you really it switches from a fear of the children, like, are they possessed? Is there no supernatural element at all in there, just like evil little bastards?
Right.
And is the governess in danger? To, what if the governess is crazy? And as we see in the climax of this film, the danger is really her towards these children. And one of them escapes. I don't want to give the whole thing away, but the idea that she is going to exorcise this problem from the manor and emerge the hero quickly goes south. Or does it?
Right. Well, there are, that final sequence is astonishing. And I remember the first time I saw it, I immediately had to rewind it. Like, what did I see? What did I just watch? It is, and we'll save our spoilers for later, should we so choose. But yes, the idea that, we don't know, and everything is shot in such bright, almost Churrasco lighting, where everything's just kind of like glowing. And even in darkness, like things are just popping, the imagery is just amazing. And that's, it was intended to be, like Freddie Francis had worked with Jack Clayton on his previous film, Room at the Top, and which is a huge international hit. And it was kind of like a gritty, English, working class. And so Jack Clayton decided he wanted to do something completely different, which was this kind of stately, 1800s ghost story. And he hires Freddie Francis again, and Freddie Francis, unbeknownst to, well, apparently it was dictated that they were going to be shooting in CinemaScope, which is very much a wide format. It's not about the kind of small and intimate imagery that Jack Clayton was looking for. And so Freddie Francis kind of had his work cut out for him, because he knew he was going to have to be doing these incredible close-ups and things like that. And it requires so much light. And so there were times where they had like 250,000 watts of light just bathing these sets. And Deborah Kerr, in her Victorian outfit, is just like drenched in sweat. And the story goes that she had to wear sunglasses in between takes and things like that. So it was apparently like it was a very expensive shoot to kind of give it the grandeur and the look that they were looking for. But I think it's such a gorgeous film. I mean, for me, it's one of those that, like, when people talk about cinematography, black and white cinematography in particular, I bring up this film and I bring up like Onibaba. I'm like, these films have that kind of sharpness that, we don't see in film noir. Film noir is more about the shadows, whereas these films are about the light.
They are about the light almost to a degree. And I think it plays well with the lack of score in certain like shock moments, that I had the benefit of watching this on my laptop. I rewound a couple of times because I frankly missed things, because I'm so used to seeing horror imagery and like the big surprises accompanied by a sting, like, look over here.
Right.
The scene where Miss Giddens is out, she's looking up at at a tall building like a tower, and she sees the figure of the ghost of Peter Quint, or so we believe, and so she believes, at the top. At first, I just see a lot of like fog kind of, or clouds kind of misting over this building.
Right.
And it wasn't until they cut back to her, and I think she was going to tell Miss Gross about, like, I saw a man up on top of this building. I'm like, what man? And I go back and I watch, and sure enough, I don't know how I missed it, but it's almost like I saw a ghost the second time where I didn't see one before, because there's no indication, there's no giant finger pointing like over here. The same thing when we see Miss Jessel in a couple of scenes out, standing in the lake in the reeds. It's so, she almost looks like because of the contrast, the chiaroscuro you mentioned, she almost looks like a tree, just because she's in a black dress. She's not moving and emoting like, ooh, I'm scary. She's just kind of like standing there staring, not even necessarily staring intently at the figures that are watching her, but just kind of like a trapped spirit. She's just existing as part of the landscape now.
Well, and that is one of my favorite scenes in horror, because I think it really captures the idea of what horror is. Horror is the notion of something that just shouldn't be. And this woman who is dead should not be just standing there. And we have the beautiful, where Mrs. Giddens is like telling Flora, look, she's there. You have to admit she's there. And Flora's like, no, I don't see her. I don't see her. And you get this like, well, what's happening? Like, why is Flora denying it? Why is she so insistent that she does see it? And she looks and she sees Miss Jessel, and Mrs. Jessel looks back at her, and then we cut back, and then we're going to cut back to the reeds, and we know, because we've seen enough horror movies, we know Mrs. Jessel is not going to be there anymore, just like Peter Quint wasn't there in the window. We know Mrs. Jessel is not going to be there, and she's there. And she's standing and she's staring, and it's like, whoa, wait, Miss Giddens sees her, we see her. It's not a trick of the light, it's not a trick of the mind. No, that ghost is real, and we are forced to identify with Miss Giddens, and we are 100% on board with her at that point.
Except,
yep,
there's a scene later, I think, in the film where Miss Gross comes out. It's like, and they see the figure out at the lake too. And at this point, we're wondering, is this the part where Miss Gross is actually going to see and have to acknowledge and like, oh
Right.
my heavens?
Right.
But they play around with that as well. So it really is ambiguous.
Yeah.
Is this all in the heads of Miss Giddens and now maybe Flora, who's been so traumatized by this insistence on her governess, who's very influential? And we've established these kids look up to the adults in their lives and become a bit enamored. Maybe she starts to believe it too. Maybe they are seeing something or believe they're seeing something that isn't there,
Right.
or maybe the ghost is there. It's just that when Miss Gross looks up, the ghost disappears because it's messing with all of them.
Yeah. No, and I mean, and I think that's kind of the magic of it. Like, there's another scene where Giddens sees the figure of Miss Jessel crying, and she goes over and there's a tear or something. Is there a tear? It's like she touches a drop of water that's on the desk. And it's like all these little pieces of evidence in quotes, that these phantoms are real, but we only see them through the eyes of our governess, Miss Giddens. And it's like, is she an unreliable narrator? Is she experiencing these things? Because we get the sense that, I mean, James's novel was all about repression, and specifically sexual repression. This is a single woman. Deborah Kerr was 39 at the time when she played it, so we could say that she's a spinster. Like, we don't get the sense that she has a past where she was married and is now widowed or whatever. So this is a woman who's been alone. And on the flip side of that, you have Peter Quint, who is, we hear that he's a sexually voracious creature, and he is inhabiting perhaps the body of Miles, who is played by Martin Stevens, who we just had in Village of the Dam last month. And the fact that these two films are just paired back to back, I'm like, and we will see Pamela Franklin again later as well in another fantastic ghost story, Legend of Hell House. That's going to be later this year. But this was Pamela Franklin's first film, and Martin Stevens had done a couple of films at this point, but I think this is kind of the high water mark of his career.
Yeah, I mean, it's very well done. The repressed sexuality thing, I'm not saying that it's not a theme there. Maybe it's heavier in the book, but I think you can watch this movie and not walk away with that idea. But now that you've planted the seed, again, something else to look forward to when I go back. It's very interesting that this Peter Quint is described as this, someone that is so alluring that kids will follow him around, and that a woman would kill herself because she can't be with him anymore.
Right.
But when you see his ghostly image, like particularly at the end where his face comes through the window, you're like, wait, really, that guy?
That guy's terrifying.
He looks like an alternate for a grave digger in a bad stage production. Like
I do not want to be around that guy. I don't want to hang out with him.
Right. I mean, so it's very interesting because maybe she's, and this is a whole other backstory theory, but maybe she is so repressed that yes, even that guy,
even that guy. But there's
Deborah Kerr was great in this movie, and also, to the point that you mentioned, she was kind of 39. She's not like, she's in that weird Hollywood actress middle ground where she's not the young ingenue and she's not playing like the elderly,
right.
stateswoman, but she still nonetheless has that kind of star power attractiveness. I'm going to get very crude here and say that I actually wrote down on my phone or jotted down that she's a gilf, a governess. I'd like to, you fill it in.
Yeah, well, she was a major Hollywood star. She'd been nominated for 6 Oscars. She won an honorary Oscar in 1994. She was major star quality, and I think she recognized, like this was going to be a showcase role for her, and she has been quoted as saying this was one of her favorite roles that she ever did. But yeah, she carries the film. It is really all about her trying to uncover what the mystery is and to save the children. The film opens with, this gorgeous shot of like 2 hands praying and a head bent over, and weeping, and her saying, I wouldn't do anything to harm the children. I love the children. And
that's how the movie closes too. So I wondered at the end of this, let's just say there is a supernatural element involved. Well, let's just say what we know about kind of haunted house stories, or I guess haunted
Right.
English estate stories. What if, in her grief, realizing what she's done, what if she kills herself and then becomes part of the landscape of the house, and the next
Right.
governess who shows up is
Absolutely. I would not, I would absolutely go along with that because, how could you live with yourself? Like this is, it is, the movie is, the movie's ending, and I don't think I'm overselling it. The movie's ending is devastating, because you've been following these characters and you are rooting so hard, and you recognize that she is up against something that is perhaps, perhaps indomitable. She cannot win this fight, but she is fighting. She is fighting to the last breath, and it's a really powerful ending, and it ends with a whimper. There's this huge rise, but then the denouement is just like crushing. You're like, oh dear, you lost.
it's strange because she did ultimately, let's go with the mental illness, or the disturbed, psyche
Mhm.
angle. She did lose ultimately because of the consequences of her actions, but she did also kind of win in that she thinks that she faced down whatever demons were trying to scare her away from the children, and get to them through her. She
Right.
stood fast and did what she thought was right, and that's what kind of makes it doubly tragic.
Yeah.
She's from the outside, from the people who come to investigate this incident, whatever, she's going to be the villain of the piece.
Yeah.
uh you know um but
Well, and I
yeah.
mean, I think even, the cost is too great for her, even at the end, where she's, whatever victory she might have had of standing up and facing down the ghost of Peter Quint, even if she did vanquish the ghost of Peter Quint, I think the cost is too high for her.
Oh yeah, I don't. What I was probably inartfully trying to say is that there's no way that she is going to be able to see any kind of victory or good coming out of
Right.
this. I'm just saying, as an audience member, I'm like, well, she did kind of win because she overcame something that she perceived of in her twisted delusions as an indomitable threat.
Yeah.
And that kind of leads me to something that was also very surprising and refreshing about this film is it's a very much a female-led, female-centric movie,
For sure.
in a surprising way. I mean, Deborah Kerr, she is the main character, but Ms. Gross, played by Megs Jenkins, she's the kind of the house, the head of the household, the housekeeper. You think it's going to be a minor part, but she becomes the sort of the second main character, and
Mhm.
there's a lot of these great conversations, and she kind of propels the mystery. She also tries to protect the children in her own way, but she's caught between a rock and a hard place because the uncle says to Ms. Giddens, she's like, look, you take on this job, and I essentially never want to hear from you again. You'll be taken care of, paid for, you got a free place to live, you don't want for anything, but
Right.
I don't want to hear about it. I don't want to know about it. When Miles gets expelled, that's the jolt to Miss Giddens. She's like, oh, I thought this was going to be a nice, kind of lovely situation, but wait, he's expelled. Who is this kid? What do I
Right.
have to deal with? And I also have to deal with it because I can't call the uncle and say, what do I do?
Right.
But Miss Gross is in the position, I'm sure it's been implied or at least explicitly stated. Yeah, I got that backwards. That you are to follow the orders of the governess.
Mhm.
So whatever she says goes.
Right.
Fortunately, the governess said, okay, take one of these kids to visit the uncle. So at least two people escaped this madness.
Hmm. Yes, that's true. That's true. Um, I did want to just talk briefly about Freddie Francis, because I think part of what makes this film what it is the look of the film. And Freddie Francis, he done a couple things for Hammer, including Evil of Frankenstein and Dracula's Risen from the Grave, which we did cover. But
Hmm.
he also did some of their we did Scream of Fear, but he did a couple of their other like psycho riffs. One called Paranoiac, Nightmare, and Hysteria. And then he also directed several anthology films for Amicus. Tales from the Crypt, which we're going to cover later, Torture Garden, Tales of Witness Madness, and he directed a feature length for Amicus, or no, it wasn't Amicus, I think it was Tyburn, Legend of the Werewolf, which also stars Peter Cushing. So that was his work as a director, but he also was a, you know, very much an acclaimed cinematographer, 2-time Oscar winner. In fact, he just won the Oscars for Sons and Lovers before he did this film. He won the Oscar for 1960s Sons and Lovers, and then did this film. And then he later won for Glory, the Civil War epic with Matthew Broderick.
I had no idea. I haven't watched Glory in a long time, but I love that movie.
Well, and he also, I mean, he shot David Lynch's Elephant Man and Straight Story and Dune. Like, he was kind of David Lynch's go-to DP as well. So yeah, I mean, like, he's had a really distinguished career, both you know, behind the camera and then behind the camera.
You know, you mentioned these things, and they're, you know, again, it's my Swiss cheese memory. I feel like I knew some of these facts at one point, but to hear them all laid out in the context of this conversation, because when I put the movie on, it's like, oh, Freddie Francis, I know that name from Hammer, so this is going to be a real treat. But yeah, I mean, Scream of Fear, which we talked about last year, or maybe it was the year before.
That was last year.
It was last year, right? That was Son of Hammerland. That movie really knocked me out, partially, you know, visually. I think this is a great kind of companion piece to that. Although you might need a stiff drink to calm your nerves after both
after, yeah. And then Jack Clayton, again, he had just had a big hit with Room at the Top, but he went on to do things like The Great Gatsby with Robert Redford, Something Wicked This Way Comes. And he did Our Mother's House, like about a year or two after this film. And that's a twisted little fable about a group of kids who their bedridden mother passes away, but they carry on as though she's still alive. And so they can keep like cashing her checks and things like that.
That's almost the plot of Don't Tell Mom the Babysitter's Dead.
Yeah, exactly. And Pamela Franklin is also in that as well. So I think it's well worth kind of, you know, pursuing Mr. Francis and Mr. Clayton's other works, because if you're a genre fan, you'll enjoy, you know, Something Wicked and Our Mother's House. And of course, the list of credits that I rattled off for Mr. Francis, including Joan Crawford's last film, Trog, from 1970.
Trog?
Oh yeah. Trog, like for troglodyte.
What do I even want to ask?
You do want to ask. You just may not, you know, thank me after you watch it.
Yikes. I feel like there was other stuff I wanted to cover here while I go through my phone. Oh yeah, the dream sequence.
Oh,
there was some, you know, I mean, a lot of the movie is kind of surreal anyway, but they do some really great kind of like fades and like cross fading and really great bizarre imagery. Like there's a turtle involved and like all this wacky stuff going on. So I think that almost lends more credence to the mental distress idea than the kind of the ghost imagery. But I don't know, what do you think? Where do you fall there? And what's the point of this? Is it to drive further confusion in the audience? Does it serve some kind of a greater narrative point?
Well, I mean, I think that is kind of the fun. I think as a filmmaker, as a storyteller, is it a ghost story or is it all in her mind? Like for me, that isn't frustrating at all. Like I love the fact that it works either way. I mean, you know, like terrible things happen regardless. You know, whether the ghosts drive her to it or whether, you know, there are no ghosts and she's just this poor person who's losing her mind. You know, either one, I'm like, this works a treat either way. And it's kind of like how I like watching Invasion of the Body Snatchers as both a, you know, a Red Scare movie and a, you know, liberal scare movie. it's like those liberals, they're trying to make us like them. Those commies, they're trying to make us like them. I'm like, I love the fact that this film kind of survives on its own drama without needing to explain itself. You may come to the end and be frustrated because you don't know the answer, but I don't think that makes it any less compelling as a film.
Well, I mean, there is some really weird stuff going on, and I wonder how much of it is kind of clues on the part of the filmmaker or just
Hmm.
kind of like red herrings or black and white herrings, I guess. There's a really bizarre moment where Miss Giddens comes across, she's in the garden, I believe, and she uncovers some shrubbery, and there's a cherub statue that's holding two severed hands.
Mm.
I'm like, that doesn't look like something that was intentionally sculpted unless you're, a Satanist or possibly Peter Quint. Um, Also, there's a scene where I don't remember the context of it, but I believe it took place on some stairs where Miss Giddens was talking to Miss Gross, and the children are at the top of the stairs and they start laughing maniacally.
Hmm.
And Miss Giddens is kind of disturbed by it, but Miss Gross doesn't quite. Maybe she's just used to them being like creepy little laughers. But now, given what we know about the end of the movie, I'm
Right.
wondering
Does she hear it at
if
all?
right. Is this all Miss Giddens thinking or hearing the laughter that Miss Gross is like, if she were to ask, like, do the
Right.
kids always laugh like this? And like, what are you talking about?
Right.
They're
Well,
not even here in the room.
and I mean, so we do need to talk about the scene with Miles in the bedroom, Miles and Miss Giddens with the kiss, because
Yeah.
that's a very strange moment. And we're like, okay, again, is that all in her head? Does that actually happen? If it does actually happen, why does it happen? Is if there is no ghost and it does happen the way it happens, why does it happen the way it happens? Like, what is going on with Miles that he gives her a kiss that is that passionate and is that adult? Like, how do we explain that if not through possession?
I can explain it by, how old is Miles supposed to be? Miles and Flora, like
Like
9?
11 or 12, I think.
Oh, well, if they're that old, I'm not disagreeing with you. I can absolutely answer that question. Being, a 12-year-old or whatever prepubescent boy, with this, as I mentioned, the very attractive Deborah Kerr as my governess, I
Mm,
can understand that. Now, that's just, preteen boy fantasy should not be reciprocated or encouraged by
right.
by a 39-year-old woman or any adult.
Well, nor is it though, right?
I know, but what I'm saying is like if given the opportunity, I can see him being bold enough to do that.
Mm,
Um, and he doesn't. I don't think he mentions anything to Miss Gross or anything. It doesn't come up again, really.
right, right. That's the other thing. Like, it just kind of happens. And he hasn't been like, I don't think we get the sense that he's been flirting with her, or that he is infatuated with her.
Right, but he has also not been alone with her really up until that point, right? Or am I missing? Because usually he's with his sister or
Yeah.
with his sister and the rest of the group. So and it also goes back to the title, The Innocents. Like, let's
Hmm.
take this from the perspective of there is no ghost. Maybe here's a third option, and I would have to watch the movie again, possibly a couple times to see if it bears out. But as I suggested earlier, what if these are just, bad seed, brother and sister? What if
Hmm.
they're manipulating this entire situation to drive their, headmistress crazy and plant those
Absolutely.
seeds of doubt, and it just backfires on one of them, horrifically?
Right. No, absolutely. That is another possibility. And any of these possibilities work for me. I love the fact that like there's nothing that says none of that is true. Like, it could be that they are just these kids who are trying to, mess with their governess. And it could be that there's a ghost, and it could be that there is somebody, losing their mind. Uh, and I love that the fact that at the end, it's like, it doesn't matter because the tragedy occurs.
Also, there's a fourth, I don't know about possibility, but an overarching question.
Hmm.
Maybe they answer this in the movie, but and I missed it, so maybe you can help me out. Why was Peter Quint at that estate with those kids?
Oh, I think he was just the like a groundskeeper, like, the person who took care of the estate. I think that was his job.
Okay. Because I wonder, maybe I'm just thinking about the uncle
Hmm.
and maybe he didn't vet the guy. Maybe he just had some references or
Oh, I'm
something and said,
sure.
"Oh, you can keep a tidy ground." It's just that if this guy was the sex maniac, charismatic, creep that he was, I wondered if there was some kind of a connection. Like, was he deliberately put out there to be away from everybody,
Mm,
or why was he put in charge of these kids? Did the
right.
uncle really hate the kids, or did he know something might happen? Uh, It's just, I don't think it has anything to do with this movie. It's just an overarching question. I'm like, that guy had no business being around anybody, let
That's right.
alone
That's
two
right.
prepubescent kids.
And I don't know how long, I don't remember if they say like how long he was on the estate, like how long he had been there, if he'd been there, if he predated the kids, how that worked. But I also get the sense that the uncle, like, I don't think vetting was really his thing. He was just kind of like, yep, you know your way around a rake. Fantastic. Get out there.
Well, that also speaks to him hiring Miss Giddens to go out there,
Mm-hmm.
because if the answer is she was having a nervous breakdown, that didn't necessarily just start when she got to the estate. In fact, she was elated to be out there. It's like, this place is gorgeous. The rooms
Right.
are wonderful. There's so much great artwork, and all these strange things start to happen. So did maybe she had a history of problematic employment beforehand. He just didn't bother to check.
That is entirely possible. So,
Mm.
yes.
Any final words or anything we haven't covered about the innocence?
Well, I feel like I have gushed inordinately throughout, and I'm not sure I've gotten your feelings on it. So trust me, you won't hurt my feelings if you didn't love this movie. But I am curious to hear what your kind of your takeaway was.
I'm what I'll call love adjacent.
Okay.
Uh, I I feel like it is one of those situations where, because I'm so inundated with horror movies and thrillers and supernatural tales that have come out since this movie came out, that I'm kind of always on the lookout for clues, or when's the rug pull going to happen, or whatever. And when we get to the end, and it's like, in a sense, it's like, that's it. It's a
Mm,
great kind of that's it, like, where it's left to me to figure out and talk through these kind of theories and ideas and figure it out. The journey is like, it's great, full of, like I said, atmosphere and great performances and wonderful ideas. But as far as what it adds up to, I need to watch it again,
mm.
knowing that I know where it goes, and knowing that this is the kind of movie it is. So yeah, I mean, I have no complaints aside from my own, baggage.
Well, I mean, I guess I can't imagine you saw the ending coming.
No. Because I figured it was going to be, one of two things, and end up kind of being a third.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I don't know how much we have spoiled accidentally
If we
talking
want to
about
just say
this.
spoilers now, like we could say, like, because I would like to talk about the ending if you have a
Oh
minute.
yeah. Okay. I do. I've got a couple minutes. But yeah, okay. Spoilers. I'm gonna put it up on the screen down there. Spoiler
Sure.
alert. At the end of the film, uh, Miss Giddens sends Flora away with Miss Gross to see the uncle. She's like, this has gone on far enough. There's enough weird stuff happening. Got to get this kids out of here, except for Miles, because I have a feeling that he's being possessed by the spirit of creepy Peter Quint.
Right.
So we're going to have it out, one on one. She dismisses the entire staff of the house, which is kind of a skeleton crew of people that we only see glimpses of here and there. They're not like fully realized characters.
Right.
But everyone's gone. She confronts Miles, and he kind of, there's some back and forth. He's kind of giving it to her, she's giving it to him. But at a certain point, he becomes like completely freaked out, but not before we see Mr. Quint's face come up behind Miles, revealing itself in this window pane. And then there's, I think, a chase and a struggle, and it turns out that young Miles ends up dead.
Mm-hmm.
Now, whether he was scared to death, whether he took a nasty fall, it's kind of left up in the air from what I recall. But at the end, she thinks that she has exorcised the demon, the influence of Mr. Quint from the boy. But it turns out what happened was that may have been true, but the boy's also dead.
Right. Right. And I mean, when you see she and Miles are facing in, you see, like this hand rising up from the bottom of the frame. And it's the hand, presumably, of Peter Quint. And it starts to kind of like cover where Miles is. And then Miles, Miles basically drops dead. Like, it's like he just dies. And it's like, that to me is horrifying. It's like, wait, how did this little child like have heart failure or whatever? Like, was he scared to death? Was the spirit in him, and as it left him, it took his life force as well? Like, the kind of the inexplicable quality of that is the other thing. Or is it something else? Is it like that she suffocated him and we only see it through her lens, which is her, bravely facing off against this specter? But it's like, we don't know what actually happened. And that's what it's like, if she, like, strangled him or smothered him or something in her attempt to keep him safe, like, that's the kind of thing that, like, that's where the horror for me really sneaks in. It's like imagining that scene that isn't through her lens, but rather from a third eye, where you're watching her smother this child in order to keep him safe.
Right. And if we are dealing with the supernatural element too, it makes me wonder about um, Miss Jessel and Flora.
Right.
It's kind of the Pet Cemetery thing where you send, you're going to have a final confrontation with the evil kids, so you send the rest of the family away, but they're still kind of in danger because you're dealing with spirits that aren't necessarily bound to a house or an estate. Yeah, I love the ambiguity of it. I love the tragedy of it. Yeah, it's weird. I'm not emotionally invested in this movie yet because I was trying to figure it out. It's the problem I have with a lot of movies where my brain is so much in hyperdrive while I'm watching something that I almost get so far ahead of it for my own good that I can't appreciate all of the drama of what's unfolding. So yeah, I got to watch this again.
Well,
I definitely will.
It is a film, I can say from experience, that does hold up well under multiple viewings and actually improves because you start to watch for the clues. And I think that, our screenwriters and Mr. Clayton and Mr. Francis, they all work together to create this thing where there are clues, but they are clues to a variety of theories. And I think that's kind of fun.
It's very fun. And I wish I could have watched this once and then given it a month and then watched a second time so I could have a more robust conversation and gushing session with you, but that's just not the way the schedules work.
I'll see you in a month.
I'm not watching this again within a month. Do you happen to have the schedule pulled up? I realized.
I believe we're watching Curse of the Demon next. Don't hold me to that. If not Curse of the Demon, Curse of the Demon's coming up like in May, if not April.
Okay, sounds fun. What can you tell me about that?
It's another one of those, is it or isn't it?
Ooh, with Curse of the Demon, that seems pretty much on the face. Like
you would think so. And
ooh.
that's where the fun is like, well, is there a demon or is it all in somebody's mind?
Is there even a curse? Who knows?
That's right. Which is why the alternate title is Night of the Demon.
Oh.
There's a British version. There's a British version, and there's an English or a US version. Curse is the US, Night is the British. And yes, there is another movie called Night of the Demon about a Bigfoot creature, but it's not that one.
And I think there's also a Night of the Demons movie.
There's Night of the Demons, absolutely, with Linnea Quigley.
Right, yeah.
It's not that one either.
Oh my gosh.
Or
I'm so confused. Let's watch all of them and then do a big melange of.
We'll call it Knights of the Demons.
Forget Beyond Hammerland. This is where we're going the rest of the year. No. All right, sir. Thank you very much for recommending this movie. I'm glad we finally got to talk about one of your favorites. I have a feeling that in time this will become one of my favorites too. Yeah, AC of Horror 101 with Dr. AC. It's always a pleasure as always. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And my written review is below in the comments, so feel free to check that out as well.
Definitely, and be sure and follow AC, and also you're YouTubing again. Like you've dove headfirst into the sickness. What's going on there?
Come on over to Horror 101 with Dr. AC over on the YouTubes as well.
Yes, I'll have a link to that down below. Like and subscribe to this channel, and join us back here next month where we'll continue our journey beyond Hammerland. Until then, whatever that is, thanks, take care, and happy haunting.